Hello, we will look at Baroque and Rococo art of Europe today. Baroque was an art movement which was termed later as Baroque, though. Baroque comes after High Renaissance and after Mannerism. So, there was a movement called Mannerism between Baroque and High Renaissance. When we look at Baroque art, there are certain significant changes in the practice, in the visual practice of art. But before going into the Baroque art, we need to consider certain historical facts of the time and what led to or how those historical facts and historical realities reflect and influence the Baroque art practice, right. So, the 17th century is the movement of counter-reformation, right. So, we know that Reformation happened in the 14th century and then later as a reaction to the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, you have in the 17th century there was a movement called counter-reformation where the Catholic Church asserted its influence again, it asserted its power and it wanted to bring back the authority of the church. So, to bring back the authority of the church, images were required, art was again required. During the during the Reformation, the images, the art practice goes outside the church. Church was not the major patron as such, but again in the context of counter-reformation, you have artists being patronized for the images, both sculptures and paintings, to be created within the church, right? Within the church, so that people can come and again they played an important role in spreading the belief, in spreading the importance of Christianity. So, we get to see this counter-reformation is an important influence. Another important historical fact of the time was something called the wars, the 30 Years' War. There was a war happened between from 1618 to 1648. It was 30 Years' War, and the war began with this. It was actually a religious war. Okay, the war between Catholics and Protestants. It began in 1618. It began as a sort of a conflict between two positions of Christianity, and slowly all the countries, all the territories of Europe participated, and it was a huge prolonged 30 years of war. And we can understand 30 years of war where the entire European territories were involved. You can see that a lot of devastation happened and Europe had seen an economic decline, right. And there was shortage of food, and you also have it a sort of famine at that point of time because of this shortage of food. So finally in 1648 there was a meeting called in Westphalia, which is called the Westphalia Treaty. So there was a treaty formed in 1648 in Westphalia. It is called Peace Treaty of Westphalia, where there were certain points, there were certain rules laid out. Okay. So in those rules, one of the important rule is the choice of religion. So you can choose whether you want to be a Protestant or a Catholic. Okay. So religion becomes a private choice. So there is a sense of sovereignty for the people to choose the practice, the religious practice. So that happens, that happens in the 1648, and you have several other points that are laid out, which are like we will have friendly relations between the territories. We will encourage trade and commerce. We won't fight against each other. So there were these friendly sort of consignments that happened, and that encouraged, the treaty actually encouraged the friendly relationship between different kingdoms within Europe, between different territories within Europe. So you have a sort of a stable environment politically and economically, and at the same time in terms of religion, it also allowed people to exercise their freedom. right? So this is an important moment in history in understanding the freedom of choice in relation to religion and in relation to the expansion of trade and commerce, and the inter-territorial relationships were peaceful, right? So this is the context where, you know, we'll see Baroque, and from early 17th century onwards, when actually the war was happening, you have on the other hand the patronage towards art also happened. So this is an important sort of a history. So Baroque, when we look at the art of Baroque, it was largely, this is a time where you know, there was something called Habsburg's family. Okay, that was a very powerful family which was centered in Spain, but it was kind of ruling over different territories, for example Austria, which was far away, and various other parts within Europe, and you have also alliances of other kings to Habsburg's family. So Habsburg family was a very important and powerful family ruling larger part of Europe. So during the war, the Habsburg family's power gets declined. Okay, and the power gets distributed into different territories where the countries form, like we have Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and, you know, Denmark and various other countries that emerge slowly, you know, after this. So when we look at Baroque art, the characteristics of Baroque art, if you look at, dynamism is one of the important characteristic. Okay, so you have dynamism, eclecticism, and a sense of flamboyance, right? So dynamism is, you can see if you compare, for example, with Leonardo, where you don't have dynamism. It is, the high Renaissance is more classical, stable, and calm, and slowly you have in the mannerism the dynamism increases, and when you look at Baroque, the paintings, the sculptures acquire a lot of energy, a lot of movement, and this is the character of Baroque. Baroque captures the movement. It is the movement, not the condition of the beginning of the movement or the condition of after movement. When we look at for example, some sculptures of Renaissance and some sculptures of High Renaissance, we can see these two moments of the beginning of a particular movement, a particular gesture, and the end of particular gesture. Okay, but in Baroque, the artists capture the intermediary moment, intermediary phase of the movement of the figures, and we'll look at the images and then see how that happens. So flamboyance is another character. Flamboyance means like flying, like not grounded on the, you know, ground line, but the figures appear flying, moving across the canvas, right? And eclecticism is combination of 2-3 things. In the sense, when we look at Baroque art, we have painting, sculpture, and architecture come together. They kind of have a dialogue between themselves. So painting and sculpture sort of participate into each other, and also the architectural elements, the sculpture gets into dialogue with architecture. So Baroque period was distinguished by exaggerated dynamism and clear detail, okay, that aim to create drama. So you have a dramatic sort of ambience and grandeur in sculpture, painting, and architecture. So these are the things that capture Baroque art. So the drama, dynamism, and grandiosity, you know, and we can see this in sculpture, painting, and architecture, right? So another thing along with Counter-Reformation is Baroque style has a melodrama. Okay, it is closely tied to the Counter-Reformation, and Baroque style melodramatically reaffirm the emotional depths of Catholic faith. So this is important. The emotion comes back. The Catholic faith is sort of integrated with the human emotional expressions. So you have this emotional, psychological depth being expressed and glorified both church and the monarchy of their power and influence. So in the context of the expression of faith and the establishment of the glory of church and the monarchy, you have Baroque art sort of dramatizes, and we'll see that how it happens when we look at the images. So let us begin with Bernini. Gian-Lorenzo Bernini again was an Italian sculptor, largely Italian sculptor, and also an architect. So this particular image that you see on your screen is the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, right? So this is made in the interior of Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome, right? And you can see it is made in 1645 to 52. So it took so much of a time. And if you look closely in the next slide, you see that in the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, you have an angel, and you have Teresa, who is a saint, Saint Teresa, and you can look at the sculpture which is rendered in marble, right? It is very dramatic, the drapery is very dramatic, it is very expressive, but look at the face of Saint Teresa, right? And if you look at the face of Saint Teresa, and where she is closing her eyes are closed and the mouth is slightly opened, right? And look at the angel has this fluttering drapery with open wings, and the angel is holding, the very adolescent looking angel, smiling, and the angel is holding an arrow, which is a golden arrow, right? So this is the moment when the angel has just removed the arrow from the heart of Saint Teresa. So this is a moment of pain, but it is called ecstasy, right? This is a moment of intense emotion, right? So Saint Teresa has written about it, right? She had a dream. This is about the dream of Saint Teresa, where she wrote about this particular moment of angel coming and removing this, actually piercing her heart with this divine arrow and then removing it. Okay, so it is a sense of emancipation, right? As if your spirit is relieved from your body, right? So this is the ecstasy, this is the divine ecstasy of your spirit being emancipated from the body, from the material body, right? And that moment, that experience of spirituality could be seen in a more human emotion, right? So you see, the experience of divine spiritual experience is articulated, is shown, is expressed in the human form, in the human expression, in the human psychological expression. So here you can see, it is not that Saint Teresa is not having that physical pain, but here she is actually happy. It is a matter of ecstasy, the extreme amount of bliss, right? So this extreme amount of bliss she is finding in that physical pain of arrow, right? So this is the moment. This captures the Baroque combination of the spirituality with human emotion, and the human emotion is expressed in the human psychological expression, right? So we can see more and more examples and try to understand this aspect. And the drapery, as I said, is very dramatic, and it is not like a calm, stable drapery like we see in Renaissance. It is quite moving, it's quite dramatic, right? And if you look back, if you go back and look at these golden rods, and these golden rods are coming from, there is an opening right at the top, and the opening, from that opening you have sun rays come down, right? So the opening is closed, of course, with a sort of a glass, but the sun rays come down from the opening, and those sun rays are represented by using these golden rods, right? So here what is happening, the architecture is sort of mixing with the sculpture. The sculpture is interacting with the architecture, right? The architecture is opened, and from that you have sunlight coming down, and those sun rays are shown with the golden sort of rods, and you see the kind of flamboyance, the kind of grandiose, dramatic sort of expression we can see here with the combination of marble, different colored marble, and you have the golden rods that are used to represent sun rays, right. So, here the architecture as well as eclectic materials, in the sense unlike earlier times when the sculpture is made only in one particular material like stone or bronze, here you have gold as well as the marble are combined in the making of the sculpture. So, the other slide, the next slide that you see is again this is done by Bernini. It is called Baldacchino in St. Peter's, in the same it is not in the same city, but not in the same church. It is St. Peter's, that famous St. Peter's of Vatican City, where the Pope sits, and this central part that you see, and St. Peter's was built quite earlier, many centuries before, and this Baldacchino is planned and designed by Bernini. And if you look at it, this is 100 feet tall, and you can imagine the scale of it sitting right in front of the altar. And if you look at it, how it is made, and this is bronze, but it is gilded, so it shines, and it is architecture. It has a sort of an architectural form, but it also has the combination of sculpture as well as architecture, right. And the architectural forms are quite expressive. You see the four columns are twisted, and you have these sort of canopy that is developed by these sort of lines of force that are going in, and you have this motif on the top. If you can manage to look on the top, you have an orb, a globe, and on which you have a cross, which is again coming from the medieval Byzantine sort of usage of the cross as well as the orb. So, you have a combination of influences here, and it's very grand in look, and you can go back, and also you can see in the altar there is this extreme amount of display of gold, right. So, let us move to the next slide. Again Bernini. Bernini was a very important sculptor after Michelangelo of High Renaissance. So, this is a sculpture, and this is one sculpture we are seeing from two sides. This is a sculpture called Apollo and Daphne. This is a story. This particular sculpture is based on a story written by Ovid. Ovid was a Roman literary person, writer, and he wrote something called Metamorphoses, and many artists have actually been influenced by Ovid's Metamorphoses. And we can see this goes back into the Renaissance, where they were trying to revive the Greek and Roman art and culture. So, Ovid's Metamorphoses became a very important influential text. Even if you remember, Botticelli also used Ovid's texts. So, this particular story is from Ovid's Metamorphoses, Apollo and Daphne. So, the story is where Daphne turns into this tree, right. So, there was a curse that if Apollo comes and touches you, if Apollo comes and touches Daphne, right after touching, she would turn into a tree, right. So, that was a curse, and but she is so beautiful that Apollo couldn't hold himself, and Apollo didn't know this curse, and he comes and he pursues her. After several attempts, she says no to his love. So, after that he sort of forces himself, and when he touches her, you can see in the sculpture that her body is slowly converting into the tree, and the bottom portion is turning into the bark, and you have her hands are turning into the branches, and her expression. So, you can see this entire turn. You can see on the right side of the sculpture, you see how Apollo is coming, and then how she is turning, and there is this circular movement, So, which is very unusual when we compare this with, for example, Renaissance. So, this movement is very important. This, look at the fluttering drapery and the kind of hair or the leaves that are kind of moving around. So this movement, this sort of kinetic quality is one of the important properties or features of Baroque art. So another sculpture by Bernini, the next sculpture, this is David, and we know the story of David. So we have seen David of Donatello, where the young teenage looking David, was standing over the head of one leg and over the head of Goliath, right? And Michelangelo also did a David, where Michelangelo's David is preparing himself for the it appears as if Michelangelo's David was preparing for the fight. So you see two movements. Donatello's David has finished killing Goliath, and you have the head, and he holds the sword and stands over there, right? He holds the head and the sword. Whereas Michelangelo's David is preparing, right? Donatello's is finished, he has killed Goliath, whereas Michelangelo's is preparing. Michelangelo's David is preparing to kill. But whereas Bernini's David that you see here, he is actually killing, he is in the process of killing, right? So if you compare these three Davids, it's a very good comparison where you can understand what are the three things that are happening in the expression, right? So like I said in the beginning, Baroque deals with the movement, right? Not the beginning or the after of the story, but the movement. So Baroque is interested in representing movement, and you can see here, so this is one sculpture, but you have three sides that are shown in this slide, 3 points of view, where he has placed David has placed the stone in the sling, and he's about to release it, right? So you can look at the movement of the body, the kind of expression of the body, and look at the expression of the face, right? So this is a very common sort of an expression. This is a very humanly expression. This is a very the psychological expression, the emotional expression of the humans when you are going to beat someone. You kind of, it comes as an inertia, which was not there, let us say, in Michelangelo or Donatello's David. So this comparison is very important for us to understand what is happening with this particular David in the context of Baroque, right? So I hope you can look at those examples and see a comparison and understand for yourself. And let us move to the other artists. So we have seen sculpture, how sculpture was happening and how movement becomes very important, and the eclecticism in sculpture, right, where different materials are combined to make the sculpture. The other artist we'll look at is the painter Annibale Carracci. Carracci was an important early Baroque painter where he was interested in the landscape, right? So like here you can see the story where the flight into Egypt, where the 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 family moves into Egypt. So this is that movement where they are crossing the river, but this doesn't look like as if the figures are important, as if the 𝗧𝗧 family is important. This looks as if any family is moving with a donkey with them, right? So this is unlike, let us say, the Renaissance composition, where the Renaissance composition occupies a lot of pictorial space. The figures occupy a lot of pictorial space, but here the landscape is given a lot of space, and this landscape again is not some sort of an idealized landscape. It's a combination of the ideal of the pastoral scene of Europe, but at the same time the pastoral scene is idealized. It is shown as if it is pleasant. It is more like Raphael's idealism, right? So Carracci comes from Bologna. So you have 3 Carraccis. Just a small information about Carracci. There were 3 Carraccis, and they came together and established a sort of an institute in Bologna. So Bologna had seen the first art institute in Europe. That was the first institute which was meant to train the artists. Okay. So, these three artists came together, they were cousins actually, came together and established a small local art school. And 𝗂𝗃 got his training over there and he moves to Florence later. And he was influenced by other Florentine artists. So, when we look at 𝗂𝗃's landscapes, these landscapes are sort of idealized landscapes of his experience in Bologna, right. So, apart from that, you have more realistic sort of paintings like this next painting that you see. It is a simple painting where it's a meal, right. A person is eating his afternoon meal. He looks like a farmer, right. He is not belonging to any affluent class, and he is also not someone who belongs to any sort of a Christian theme, right. This is not a Christian theme. But if you look at the painting, he is in the process of eating, and the way the painting is done, you know, the painting is quite, the application of paint is quite rough. It is not very refined like you see in the earlier context. And the emphasis is on still life, right. You have the table and you can see the equal amount of emphasis is given to still life also. You know, you have a glass, you have a jug, you have, you know, he is eating his meal, you have different objects, you have bread. So, the amount of importance that is given to the figure and his activity of eating, and which is a very secular activity. This has nothing to do with the Christian theme, or this has nothing to do with the religion, but it is a sort of a secular theme. And this is the time, the Baroque movement is the time when the still life becomes very important, and still life as a genre, as a separate practice, emerges during this time. And if you look at the still life, you know, it is broadly, it is a broadly and realistically painted still life, which owes much to Flanders and Holland. So, for still life during this time, it was Flanders and Holland where we see artists were making a lot of still lifes. So, this painting takes, you know, it sort of influenced from the Flanders and Holland practices, you know, the artists who were painting still lifes in Flanders and Holland, which is northern part of Europe, right. So, let us move to, so we have seen still life as an important thing that is coming into the painting. Let us move to another artist called Caravaggio. Caravaggio is a very important artist when it comes to Baroque, particularly a painter. And the painting that you see on the screen is Calling of St. Right. Caravaggio's one important point about his painting is his compositions are set in places where you cannot imagine, in places which are which belong to the lower classes, right. So, if you look at the Renaissance compositions of Christian themes, we have elaborate ambiences, very rich aristocratic ambiences, right. But Caravaggio composes the Christian themes in the ambience, in the atmosphere, in the location which belongs to the lower class. This is a very important thing when it comes to Caravaggio. And Caravaggio is known for his dramatic light, right. So, and a focused composition. If you look at this particular painting, it is called Calling of St. Matthew. You have Christ coming from the right side, right, and he is pointing at someone in the center, and St. Matthew is sort of trying to confirm whether Christ is calling him or not, right. So, St. Matthew didn't know the power of Christ, who the Christ was, right. So, it looks like as if, you know, at the end of the day you have a bunch of workers sitting at the table and chatting and maybe counting their money, right. This is a very secular, simple act, and maybe sitting at a cafe or at the corner of the street, right. So, these are the areas where Caravaggio composes his important themes. And if you look at the backdrop, it is entirely flat, It is not a grand composition. The grandness is created, the drama is created by the way the light is used, So the light is coming from the right and it is lighting up the center, right. So it is a very calculated light where the light is falling on the focused area of the narrative. It is not opening up the entire space. So this is also, this contrast is also very significant of Caravaggio. And so here it is very sort of a secular gesture, right, when here Christ as a great figure is not being established. The way the Christ is shown, he appears as if he is someone who belongs to the same class, or someone who is yet not powerful in the eyes of 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧, right. So which is why 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 couldn't recognize the power of the Christ, and he is saying, is it me you are calling? So that is a kind of gesture. So this is one of the important paintings of Caravaggio, and people are casual in their gestures, right. So let us move to the next slide. Next slide is Death of Virgin Mary. So what you see here is Virgin Mary is in deathbed, right. So here the elaborate drapery at the in the top is very important, in the sense it is pictorially significant, and that the color combination, the red drapery, the curtain on the top has a link with the figure of the Mary, right. So this is not something called assumption. This is, he is calling it Death of Virgin, and you can see here the figures are really engaged in the agony, in the expression of this emotion, and this is like anyone's death. It is not like Mary is shown as if she is a great person, but how the idea of bringing the God, the Christian themes, and locating them in the everyday, locating them in the common space, in the common people. So this is what is important when it comes to Baroque. The experiences of divine, the divine experience, the spiritual experience is felt through the human emotions, is felt through the human expressions, right. So even if I am feeling happy, if I am feeling pleasure or pain, it is something that which is given by the God, right. So this is a kind of Catholic Reformation where the human pleasures and pains are understood in relation to the spiritual experience, were seen as if they are themselves spiritual experiences. So this is an important sort of departure from painting, from the language of painting, in the context of language of painting, from the earlier modes of composition, right. So we have seen Caravaggio and his dramatic use of light. Let us move to the next artist, who is an important artist again like Caravaggio. He is 𝗬𝗓𝗂, Diego 𝗬𝗓𝗂. 𝗬𝗓𝗂, and this painting is called Water Carrier of Seville. And again, what is important here is the way the objects are painted, right. And you have this water seller carrying two huge pots, and you have a young boy or taking the water, maybe buying the water, and you have another figure at the back who is actually in the process of drinking, right. So you have three different ages: an old man who is selling the water, a young boy, and you have a man at the back. And the three ages are shown. I mean, this is very important to keep in mind, where the age differences are shown with their physiognomic as well as psychological expressions. Look at the curiosity of the boy, the curious look of the boy, and look at the torn garment of the seller, water carrier, and look at the details of the water dripping down from the surface of the pot, and the layers or the lines of the pot. So this particular kind of detail, You know, 𝗧𝗦𝗃𝗀 is known for this kind of a detail. And what does it mean? It means the understanding of the material, you know, different objects, the pots, the two different pots, and look at the glass, the transparent glass and the translucent glass, and within the glass we can also see the water, right. So, the watered area is differently rendered than the non-watered area. So, the artists have acquired a very keen understanding of the expression of different materials, you know, how pot and the clay pot would look like, and how the clay pot should be painted, and you know, it introduced a sort of a very intense realism. And 𝗧𝗦𝗃𝗀 is an artist who has worked with this intense realism of the material world. Okay, within the material world you can search for the spiritual experience. So, this is the kind of dogma, this is the kind of the idea. And the next slide is again by 𝗧𝗦𝗃𝗀. This is a very important painting, it is a very complex painting. It is called La Menina, the Maids of Honor. La Menina, and there were books written on La Menina. There was a huge book written on one particular painting, this particular painting. And this painting is about painting. To put it in one single sentence, this painting is about painting itself, where because of the lack of time we can have like a simple description of it, where you have, when we look at, you have the girls are standing, the maids and the maidservants and the princess, the daughters of the king are standing right in the center, right in the foreground, right, and they are looking at you, right, looking at the viewer, if you are looking at the painting, they are looking at you. And you have a dwarf, you have a dog right there, and you have the attendants looking at the child who is looking at you, right. So, there is a lot of look that is employed in it, the gaze, what we say, you know, people looking at each other and people looking out into the space or towards the spectator, right. And there is this man on the right side holding a brush and a palette, and he is in the process of painting. And on the left side you have a canvas, we can see a portion of canvas and a portion of easel. So, this tells us that he is actually painting. So, whom is he painting? He is looking at the viewer, actually he is looking outside, right. So, that means all these people are looking outside and the painter is also looking outside, right. So, the entire attention is actually placed outside the canvas, right. And if you go back in the painting, you look at the figure who is at the back, in the background there is a figure turned towards you, looking at the viewer again, and he is climbing, and in the process of climbing steps he has turned his head and he is looking at the thing that is happening here in the foreground, right. And right beside that person there is a sort of a frame. In that frame, which looks like a mirror, not a painting, because if you look at the top portion there are paintings displayed, and the surface of those paintings are different from the mirror surface that you have. So, in the mirror you have two figures, and these two figures are king and queen, right. If these two figures, the king and queen, are reflected in the mirror, that means the artist is painting the portrait of king and queen, right. If that is not a mirror but it is a painting, then whom is he painting? Whom are they looking at? So, this is a very interesting ambiguity, you know. So, there is a lot of ambiguity about this painting. There is no fixed meaning, whether he is painting someone outside the canvas, whether he is painting the king and queen, or is there a mirror into which all these figures are looking and he is actually painting the portrait of the child, because you also have a painting of portrait of the child. So you have, it's a very complex painting, right? So but the painting is about the very act of painting, because he is painting and he is looking at you outside, and this is about the encounter of the viewer. He is encountering the viewer. You know, there are very rare paintings where the figures look at and encounter the spectator. So if you want, you can go and research on this, you can read more on this, and you can have a lot of complex understanding, a very complex understanding about this painting, right? So I just have opened it up, what are the possibilities, but it actually opens up the very discourse of painting, discourse of gazes, right? So let us move to the other artist. This is from Flanders, from the northern part of Europe, Peter Paul Rubens. Rubens is a very famous painter, and this is called the Elevation of the Cross, right? It's from Antwerp. Elevation of the Cross, where he's been Christ is been crucified, he's nailed to the cross, and you can see right in the center, it's an altarpiece, you can see right in the center where these very expressive muscular figures are sort of lifting, right? And you can see there's a diagonal, right? So you have a sort of movement, that, you know, is created by the placing of the figure of the Christ diagonally, right, which is very unusual. So the diagonal movement is very important when it comes to Baroque. You know, the figures move diagonally and flamboyantly. And look at the muscles, look at the expression of these figures, and look at the kind of tension, the movement. You know, you have two movements. One is, you know, the movement of the body of the Christ, you know, it is taking you up, and there is a robe that is coming down that is pulled by the other figure. So these men create this huge drama, right, with their muscular figuration. And look at the light that is falling right on the figure of the Christ, right in the center, and it sort of dramatizes the entire scene. And there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of drama that is happening, right? And in the similar way, you have that drama expands into the other two, the movement and the drama expands into the other two panels, you know, in the triptych. So Rubens is known for his nudes and dramatic movement of the nudes. And this particular slide, the next slide, the allegory of the outbreak of war. So this is during the war, actually. This is about war, where and this is represented allegorically, right? So this is about the Romans and the war of the war between the Romans and the other kingdoms. So you have the war is represented, you know, as allegorically as a woman here, right? So the woman is stopping the representative of the war right in the center, right? But you look at the kind of movement, the movement from the left to right, right? So how this movement is created in the painting and how the figures are falling down on the right side, right? And the naked body of the voluptuous naked body of the figure is very important, because Rubens is known for these voluptuous, very round bodies of nudes, and the light sort of dramatizes. You can see the light is actually making the figure more evident. It is opening up the figure. It is making the figure as the focused center of the canvas. Let us quickly move to the other painting. Let us look at the still lifes. This is Clara Peters. Clara Peters was known for his still lifes. This is a still life with flowers, goblet, dry fruit, and, you know, other stuff. This is an oil painting, and you can see the significant thing about it is you have different objects, right? You have flowers painted, and the quality of flowers is captured very well, and you have different objects, right, of different materials. different metals. So the quality and the character of each and every material is captured within the oil medium. So Baroque actually opens up this sort of practice of understanding different materials and understanding how to represent them in the oil medium. So oil as a medium expands its range of painting, during the Baroque time, and still life made it possible. Still life challenged the artists to expand the range of the painting, the pictorial practice. So as we move to the northern part of Europe, so Frans Hals, the next artist, Frans Hals was an important artist of Holland. This is Arches of Saint Hadrian. This is a sort of a celebration of the local commanders coming together, and sort of it is this celebration of coming together, right? As it is this sense of victory that you have here. So where this is not about the Christian theme, this is not about the religion, but this is about the historical, the local scene. And you have different figures, different people. They were actually the historical figures. They were the people of that particular place where Frans Hals is coming from, right? So in a similar manner, if you look at the next slide, this is called the women regents of the old men's home at Haarlem, right? Frans Hals at his later age, when he didn't have any money to survive, so he ends up this place called Haarlem, and he wants to stay in this men's home run by these women regents of the place. So they asked him that if you want to stay here, you have to paint our portraits, right? So then he says, okay, then he paints these portraits. And if you look at this particular painting, look at the way he is distributing the white, okay, look at the way he is distributed the figures, right? And it looks like a play between, a kind of a compositional play between the arrangement of faces and the white kind of the garment that they are wearing, right? So, and if you look at these faces, their faces look a sort of a gloomy faces, they are not like happy celebratory faces, but he wanted to capture the kind of authority and the sort of the negative sadness that is associated with the authority, right? So what you see highlighted here is this white color and the faces and their particular expressions and the hands and different gestures of the hands, right? So this is a very important painting which captures a sort of a sadness, and Frans Hals was also sad at that point of time because he was surviving, he was struggling to survive, and that was the time when he painted this painting. It was the time of winter, okay, and winter becomes even more difficult to survive in that region, right? So if we look at the next artist quickly, this is Rembrandt, and this is called the Company of Captain Frans Banning, or it's simply called Night Watch. And this is a sort of a dramatic composition. This is entirely an imagined composition of Rembrandt, where you have the captain in the center, and he's led, and look at the light. And this is very important for the way the dramatic use of light is employed here. And you have a lady right in the off center on the left side, and that the lady herself is Rembrandt's wife, right? So and the light that is falling on these figures, and very calculatedly the light is also falling on the wife, on the lady figure, right? So this particular painting with its dark and light sort of play, it dramatizes the way the light is falling as if it is a stage. It looks like as if it is a stage. And this is the character of Baroque art, Baroque painting. And Rembrandt's composition use light very calculatedly, and as if it is a theater, right? And the next painting by same Rembrandt. Rembrandt is known for his number of self-portraits. He did several self-portraits from his early stages to the later, from his when he was a young boy to the later stages when he was about to die, right? So you can see through his painting, through his portraits, we can see the transformation of himself. And Rembrandt actually, when we look at these self-portraits, we can see a sort of a deep association of himself with the painting. It's not just a matter of painting yourself or glorifying yourself, but it is a kind of a documentation, a kind of a effort to capture the emotional and psychological condition of Rembrandt and in that particular stage. Okay, if you look at this painting, this is quite a later stage that he painted, where you see he's old, and look at his face and you can see that the delicate, frail quality of his age, of his face could be seen, and the light is very soft. Unlike the earlier painting, the light is more dramatic. Here the light is soft and the light is coming diagonally, filtered through a window maybe, right? And he's again in the act of painting, right? So he's looking into you, he's looking at the viewer, interacting with the viewer, but he's not actually, it is not the gaze that we see in Velacqua. He's not looking at you to know you maybe. It is a sense of, you can see a sense of expression, a sense of dialogue. He's trying to speak to you, right? So you can see that kind of a emotional sensation could be seen in this particular painting. And of course, this is again in the northern part of Europe, Dutch. Another painting, quickly if we move, Vermeer. Vermeer is known for his paintings with light, a particular light that exists in the northern part of Europe, and his elaborate interiors, right? Vermeer's paintings are characterized with this kind of a light that comes from a window that is filtered through the glass of the window, and the softness of that light is very important when we look at Vermeer. And here the Vermeer, this painting is the allegory of the art of painting. This is again about painting, like Velacqua was talking about the painting. Vermeer is talking about painting in a different way. This is a sort of an allegory of the art of painting. This is about painting itself, where you can see an artist, presumably Vermeer himself, dressed up in this dandy sort of a costume, and he's engaged in the act of painting, and he's painting a model, right? So this, the painter figure, the figure of the painter painting the model, this is the classical image of an artist, right? And look at the ambience, right? At the back you see on the wall hanging a world map, right? And maps we can see emerged from the High Renaissance onwards, and maps are very important tropes of this time. And having a map also means that you also have traveled. So it is also an object of being proud, object of knowledge, object of importance. So Vermeer is painting, and you see how the composition is made, where the curtain, the curtain is very thick and it's elaborately ornamented. And right behind the curtain you have this very delicate light that is coming and spreading throughout the ambience, spreading throughout the space, right? So you have a chandelier on the top, and the chandelier is also very acutely painted. It's very intricately painted, right? And you don't have much of a movement that you see, for example, in Rubens or other artists. So Vermeer is known for his sort of a stable, calm, very grounded compositions, right? And this is an example of it. Peter Clay's, the next artist, the last work that we see now is the still life. It is Vanitas still life. So you have a lot of things here, different objects. It's not food. You have a violin, you have a goblet that is fallen, you have different objects that are arranged, and you have a sort of a globe, which is a steel or a shining globe. And on the other hand, you have, on the opposite side, you have a skull, right? So this globe, in this globe, you can see the reflection of the window from which the light is coming, and also the artist himself, right? So it is an interesting painting where the artist's reflection could be seen within the painting, right? So the artist's image is implied, implicated within the composition of the painting, and you can see each and every object is painted with their characteristic qualities, the smoothness of the round ball, or the orb, and the shining translucence of the goblet, and the wood quality of the violin, and each and every object is immaculately painted, right? And we have seen, and you can see that the concave or convex mirrors played an important sort of a role during this time, and mirrors played an important role. And we can see in Velázquez's painting, he is looking outside as if he is looking at the mirror, and we have seen mirror also represented in that painting. And here also you can see reflection is making an important point here. So reflection, mirror, and all these things are emerging at this point of time, and they were employed by the artists, right? So we have seen a small section of Baroque in this particular lecture, and how different artists have painted different things, and how engaging with the human life, not only the emotional, psychological aspects of the human, but also the material life of the human society. So this is very important, and the material life is also related to the expansion of trade and commerce that I haven't pointed yet. So so when we look at these paintings, it is important to understand the knowledge of the artist about the material reality, both in terms of the emotional and psychological dimension of the human beings in the society, as well as the material world that was expanding. And all these got reflected and represented through oil painting. So oil painting expands during this time. Okay, thank you.